This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek in Pacifica, and the struggle in the United States over the attacks on workers, the assault by Trump and the government on public workers and private workers, and Project 2025 for the working class and for unions is an existential crisis in many ways for working people. And joining us today is Carl Rosen. He's president of the United Electrical Workers in the United States, and which has a tremendous history coming out of the 1930s, and the union was formed in 1936. So, for our listeners, Carl, why don't you talk about the UE, its formation, and what happened, how it was formed, and what formed the union?
Well, we were an original CIO union and we were built from the bottom up. So workers had started self-organizing independent locals at a number of large manufacturing plants. These are plants with 5, 10, 15,000 workers making electrical parts for companies like General Electric and Westinghouse and Sylvania, RCA, companies like that, mostly on the East Coast initially. They reached out to each other and said, hey, we need to get the whole industry organized. Let's form a national union to do that. And they gathered a small convention from, I think, 7 different locals in Buffalo in the middle of a snowstorm in the winter of 1936, and established themselves, drafted a preamble that has absolutely stood the test of time about being committed to aggressive struggle to move the working class forward, and a very radical non-discrimination clause, radical for that time in terms of covering everyone, race, religion, etc., gender, but also regardless of your political beliefs. They did not want people being discriminated against, based on any particular thoughts that they might have themselves. And all of that was very important. Our union got really challenged as we moved into the McCarthy era because we quickly became a huge union. We were the 3rd largest union in the U.S. In the period just after World War II. We proudly did our part in the huge strikes that took place in 1946 when workers tried to regain some of what they had lost during the war, when there were freezes on wages but not on profits. And big strike wave, UE, the UAW for auto workers, the steel workers for that industry too. And we all made big gains. And that led to the president of GE having a famous statement, a speech where he said, America faces 2 enemies, Russia abroad and labor at home. And that was really the declaration of the McCarthy era, and really was what that whole period was about. It wasn't about defeating communism. It was about defeating a militant and unified labor movement that had the ability to actually win some measure of justice for working people. So we went into a very dark period at that point, lost a lot of members due to raids from other unions. 9 unions were eliminated. UE survived and has carried forward its independent outlook towards how we need to fight as workers, how we need to maintain ourselves politically ever since that time.
And of course, the ILWU was the other union that the government tried to crush, throw Harry Bridges, its founder, out of the country, and made a big attempt to destroy that union as well. And of course, the last general strike in the United States was in 1946 in Oakland.
Right. And we very parallel history. We've always considered ourselves to be sister unions with the West Coast Longshore workers, and very proud of that. And at the same time that government was trying to throw Harry Bridges out of the country, they were trying to throw Jim Matlis, who was one of our national officers and was a Hungarian immigrant. They were trying to throw him out of the country. The parallels to what is happening right now with the attempt to deport Mahmoud Khalil for standing up on behalf of his beliefs, not violating any laws, simply speaking his mind. In fact, literally being a spokesperson for a campaign for justice in Palestine. And my understanding is he was actually a grad worker himself, so a union member for some part of the time that this activity was going on. And then news just broke, you may not even be aware of it, that Colombia has now discharged the president of the grad workers union at Columbia the day before bargaining is to start. This is exactly like what happened in the McCarthy era, where McCarthy type committees would come into cities where there was a labor fight underway by UE or one of the other 11 unions that were refusing to kowtow to the establishment at that time. And they would come in and they would subpoena the entire leadership of those locals that were about to be on strike, or maybe were already on strike. And the company would fire all of the leaders on the basis that, oh, since they were subpoenaed, they must be a national security threat and they can't work here anymore, and leaving the union, essentially leaderless. And then another conservative union would swoop in and try to take the members away. So this cooperation between right-wing governments and employers is nothing new here. And the only way we will beat this is through unity and organizing the actions that are needed to disrupt the business as usual. We're going to have strikes. We're going to have massive strikes.
And of course, Project 2025 says in it that they're against unions, among public workers. They're for company unions. They would like to get rid of independent unions, form company unions, and they want to attack democratic rights. So what you're saying, though, is that actually this witch hunt against uh, graduate unions and their leadership is a replica and similar to what happened in the 50s when communist militants and other unions were targeted by the government and some union officials who benefited from that as well. You say there were raids on the UE, there were raids on other unions to get rid of these unions entirely.
Absolutely. And this pattern of targeting immigrant workers as being, the most vulnerable, also, occurred at that time, as you just mentioned, in terms of they're going after Harry Bridges and then Jim Matlis from our union, who I believe at that point had actually, become a naturalized citizen, but that didn't stop them. The laws were not getting in their way any more than they're getting in the way of Trump unless we stop them from mass action. I'm actually heartened the amount of protest that's going on, and it's led to, newspapers that in the 50s were on the opposite side on this. I mean, the Chicago Tribune in the 1950s, when one of our shops got hit with these subpoenas by one of the McCarthy committees, a big Stuart Warner electrical auto parts plant. The Chicago Tribune listed the names of the people who had been subpoenaed on the front page so that they then became blacklisted and couldn't get other jobs in the industry. That was clearly what their intent was there. They were part and parcel of what was going on. This week, the Chicago Tribune ran an article, an editorial, saying that we need to protect freedom of speech and that this is wrong what the government is doing. We can win this fight. We can save Mahmoud. And the petition that was put out there in just a few days, it has over 3 million signatures. I mean, that's just phenomenal, and we just need to encourage it and make it grow. And the protests that are happening, there was a group from Jewish Voices for Peace, 100 folks who sat in the lobby of the Trump Tower today. They all took arrests. They were willing to take arrest for it. This is the kind of actions we're going to have, to turn this around.
And the rise of fascism, of course, is not unique. There was a fascist movement in the 30s that led
Mhm.
to the rise of Hitler. And today you have a government that believes it's above the law. The Supreme Court ruled that if you declare your action as president an official act, you can get away with it. What do you think about the rise of fascism in the United States and what it means for working class people and unions?
Yeah, well, look, what we're seeing here is a curtailment of the people's democratic rights in the service of big business. There's been a long time argument on the left that we're able to have democratic rights in this country until our exercise of them as working people threatens the wealth and power of the ultra rich. At which point they're going to try to curtail it. And we have a section. I don't think the ruling class is united on this necessarily, or all of corporate America is united on wanting this kind of Trump approach to things, this Elon Musk approach to things. but they're damn well going to be willing to take advantage of it. And if they can use it to weaken the unions at their workplaces, et cetera, they will. So it's it's why we need to, as working people, stand up and defend our democratic rights. But we have to understand this is not the frame of it being democracy versus fascism is not the whole story. What the whole story is, it's the working class against the oligarchs. And that's what we need to be very clear about.
And there's been a rise of protest against Elon Musk, Tesla, all
Mhm.
over the country. And many of the people that are there are against fascism. They're worried that we've got a fascist government. They're also against oligarchs. Would you say that's the beginning of a anti-capitalist movement, that people are fed up more and more and see the threat of fascism as a threat that threatens all working people, all people of the United States?
Well, I'd say there's been a burgeoning anti-capitalist movement for the last couple decades. Frankly, since the turn of the century, when in economic downturn after economic downturn, people are worse and worse off after each one, and there's not any real recovery. And the rich keep getting richer, and everybody else is barely getting by. When we're at the point where two-thirds of the folks, even during a supposed good economy like we had, that was the claim of the last year of the Biden administration, right? Oh, this economy is great. Literally two-thirds of people are living paycheck to paycheck. That's not a good economy. That's not an economy that's delivering for working people. So everything that you've seen, including the much greater support for unions right now, the willingness of young people to organize, to self-organize, right? Which is what we had in the 1930s, and we're seeing that again now. It's why we have so many graduate workers organized, is because they self-organized, because they realized nobody else is going to take care of things for them. They're in a bad situation, and they're going to have to organize themselves to get out of it. They can't rely on the employer to do it. They can't rely on the government to do it. The working people have to do it for themselves. And so I would say uh, that movement has already been building, and it's frankly because of that we're getting this reaction of the kind of government that we have now, where they're trying to repress folks. Of course, the other reason we have the kind of government we have now is because the Democratic Party at a national level has been just absolutely rotten to its core, and making sure that anything that actually would start to help with some of the problems that working people face, like the programs that Bernie Sanders has put forward, make sure that they're throttled, before they can get into place. I mean, the way they systematically work to make sure that he wouldn't have a fair shot at winning the Democratic nomination, either in 2016 or 2020. I mean, just absolutely guaranteed, and then made sure there wasn't a primary in 2024. I mean, all of these things were to make sure that working people wouldn't actually have a legitimate voice within the Democratic Party. And so we got what we got now.
And one of the things that's taking place now with the Trump administration is the idea that we have to have a trade war against Canada, against other countries to resuscitate American capitalism. American capitalism can't compete against China. It can't compete against other countries. So we're going to revive the power of American capitalism and imperialism with a trade war. What's your view about that plan based on the decline of capitalism and the need to be more competitive?
Yeah, well, I'm very dubious that this is about trying to make sure that capitalism can be revived. I think, it's a product of Trump's somewhat bizarre politics at times, and he makes promises and he tries to carry them out, and he just doesn't have a rational approach to much of anything, even to what the needs of capitalists are necessarily, except that he has a rational approach to particular capitalists that he's in bed with. I mean, it's crony capitalism. So he's going to do things that help take care of certain folks himself, number one. And a lot of the rest of this, I think, is probably posturing. I mean, look, there is a well of anger in the working class, as there ought to be, that our whole industrial base got moved out of this country. That was done thanks to U.S. foreign and military policy, and unfortunately, with the connivance of a section of the labor movement that here that helped ensure that only corrupt unions would be able to survive overseas, as left unions were squashed in many countries, especially in Latin America. So, we had a policy, and that was really what the fight was about, the split in the AFL-CIO, or in the CIO, I should say. They hadn't merged yet with the AFL. And in 1949, when we left, it was, will labor have an independent position on foreign policy or not? And by most of labor agreeing they wouldn't, that they would just follow blindly behind whatever the two-party consensus was on foreign policy, it made it clear that it allowed a U.S. foreign and military policy that was designed to make the rest of the world safe for American corporations to move over there, to exploit the folks there, and to ultimately gut the manufacturing base in the U.S. So there is a well of anger for good reason here, and part of how Trump got elected was by tapping into that. So he wants to at least make a show of bringing some manufacturing back here. And and it's not impossible that some of the steps he'll take may assist in that, but it's all going to be so disruptive the way he's going about it, that it's going to result also very likely in a lot of damage to the economic situation for many Americans.
Well, one of the things that he has done is they shut down the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, which funded the Solidarity Center, which was controlled by the AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler, before that, Trumka. And the Solidarity Center was getting $75 million a year, one of the largest parts of the
Mhm.
AFL-CIO for operations in 62 countries. It was involved in overthrowing governments. The AFL-CIO was supporting the overthrow of the Chilean government. They've been involved in many governments around the world supporting corporate unionism, labor imperialism. What does this mean as far as workers? Because if the AFL-CIO or the made unions are in alliance or collusion with the U.S. government internationally, is that what you're saying, that this kind of politics is not going to benefit American workers?
It wouldn't. I would have to say though, in some fairness, I don't follow it super closely, but the worst things that had happened in terms of U.S. labor collusion with right-wing forces in other countries to suppress genuine, honest trade unions there, really, that's something that's more a historical piece than what was happening most currently. Although that is an awful lot of money, and you have to wonder where
75 million,
where it
that's a
was all
lot of money.
going.
75
Yes,
million a year. I mean, that's
that's right. I can't say I'm a close student of it, a close enough student to know. But what I will say, I mean, what's frankly interesting about the way Trump is flailing around is he is partially dismantling the U.S. imperial project. Not necessarily because he wants to. He wants to in terms of saying, "Oh, I don't want us to be imperialist." I think he's got a different vision of what it is to be imperialist. I think his vision is a more closer geographic one, and that's why he's talking about Canada and and Greenland, and then Panama because of the canal. Although that looks now like that was all again just crony capitalism to force a Chinese company to sell its stake to a U.S. company that will not profit off of it instead. Um, but he's a mass of contradictions. Why not grab Mexico too, right? Now, I'm not advocating for that, obviously, but
except they're Latino. He doesn't want the Latinos.
exactly. So his problem is he's so racist that he can't think about that part also, right? Because it follows the logic, obviously, otherwise. It'll be interesting to see how it works out. There's certainly some places where that will be better off around the world because the U.S. is no longer going to be intervening there to the same extent. But there's other places that he's going to make far worse. Obviously, Palestine and the Middle East in general being one of them.
Well, one of the things about uh, U.S. capitalism now in decline is that, and in relationship to Hitler, is it seems that Trump is actually disassembling the government. I mean, massive cutbacks in government programs, attacking the veterans, the Veterans Administration, attacking
Mhm.
all public workers. It sounds like he's alienating and attacking large numbers of workers who many of them may have supported Trump.
Right. And it's our job to go out and organize those folks to protest and raise hell. and stop him in his tracks and reverse the course. And in the course of it, also educate them about why you need unions and why you need social policies that are for the common good and not everything based on the market and what corporations need to increase their profit lines. So
And,
we have the opportunity to do that. We're fighting, though, obviously, in a situation where there's a tremendous number of defensive battles going on. We got to turn them into offensive battles. Is the job of the labor movement and anybody who has a grasp of what's going on here.
and one of the issues is the right to have a union. And of course, the government, the Trump administration has taken away the right of the TSA, American Federation of Government Employees, to represent the
Mhm.
TSA workers. I think the aim, they're pretty overt about it, is they don't want unions among public workers, teachers, public services. They want to privatize the entire section of the workforce that are public workers, and that has led, of course, to the air traffic controllers who've been attacked, blamed for the Washington D.C. airline incident while they're laying them off, and it's
Mhm.
also led to Sarah Nelson, who's president of the airline flight attendants in the CWA, and I'm a member of the CWA News Guild, to say that we should organize for a general strike. What does that mean? And how would a general strike be organized? It seems like the working class is really not that united yet in an organizational way. So when you talk about a general strike, even to defend the TSA workers and against this union busting, what does that mean?
Yeah, well, I think it would be good for you to interview Sarah if you could at some point and let her speak to that some. I will say that what she when she raised the possibilities of a more general strike in the face of the shutdown, the government shutdown under the first Trump administration, it was tremendously helpful. And that, speaking to that publicly, combined with the fact that you had air traffic controllers who were no longer showing up for work because they hadn't been paid for several weeks. It created the kind of crisis that very quickly brought that shutdown. Basically forced the right wing, most right wing elements of the government to back down and not carry through with their draconian efforts. I, I would have loved to see if, in the face of this action taken against the TSA workers, that not only the TSA workers, but large sections of government employees and as much of the private sector as we could get to uh, could have walked out the door. I think it's going to take things like that to fully turn things around, probably. The reality is we don't have a labor movement capable of organizing that right now. Federal workers, of course, have a no strike clause. I think we all know that bans on strike just means you can't afford to lose, right? So if you can strike and have enough of an effect, you can win and you won't lose your jobs. But the problem the problem is folks aren't understanding that fully and aren't organized enough to take care of it. And you didn't, that was not, that wasn't an approach that union was prepared to take, in part because I don't think they've had people in fights with management. I mean, you don't any place that you want to strike, you don't strike by just waiting until the day the contract expires and then say, okay, we're going to strike. If you want to strike, you have to have been building to that for a while. With having members engaged in ongoing fights with management, so they know which side they're on, they know what it's going to take to win, and they know that they aren't going to win without striking. That's when they're willing to strike. That's when people are willing to sacrifice their income. So we have to have a labor movement that is fighting a lot more than it is right now before we can build to that level of mobilization. But there are also there's good things happening. There's the building towards May 1, 2028, as the auto workers have lined themselves up to do and have encouraged others to. Our union is trying to figure out which contracts we can get lined up with that. That could be a very effective effort at that time. And this May 1st, at least in some locations of this year, not 2028, could be effectively in a general strike in some sections of the economy. If we see immigrant workers willing to make the kind of take the kind of steps that they did in 2005, 2006 against the Sensenbrenner bill, where we had close to 500,000 people participate in this huge march on a weekday in Chicago. It shut down whole industries in Chicago because everybody was there, and it wasn't a strike organized by unions. There was no union notice we're going on strike on May 1st. It was shop by shop, people not going, and where it was, generally folks told the boss in advance. And we had this in a number of our unionized shops. We had several manufacturing shops that were largely Latino, and you know, we just had a committee organize themselves and go to the boss and say, none of us are going to be here on May 1st. We're just letting you know so you can plan accordingly. But if you think you're going to penalize people for taking the day off, you're not going to have anybody. If you want to fire us for doing it, there'll be nobody here on May 2nd either then. And the bosses, every single one of them said, okay, let's do this in a rational way. Maybe we'll offer people extra work on Saturday if they want to come in to make up lost production and they won't lose any pay. And we won't get in the way. We know you won't be here. So, when you have a mass movement built in the community, built in the working class, that's when you can pull something off like that. And that's we've got to build up that level of anger, which comes in part though from that level of people understanding what's going on. And we are not there yet, but it's increasing. And you can see it in the poll numbers that are coming out. There's a deep anger at the way these job cuts are being carried out. And just wait. We shouldn't wait. We've got to stop it from happening. But they want to get their hands on Medicaid, then Medicare, then Social Security. And I think when you get to that point, you're going to have a situation where we'll be able to mobilize an awful lot of people. But even better is to mobilize them before it happens, so it doesn't happen.
And of course, one of the lessons of PATCO, that strike of the air traffic controllers, is the Reagan government was successful in breaking that union, and then they used that to go after other unions. So if they're successful in getting away and busting, like the
Right.
TSA union, other workers are going to be affected whether they know that or not. And I think the difference today is that there's a mass anger growing against the union busting tactics of the Trump and the government.
Right, right. And just to be clear, it wasn't the government then that carried out getting rid of other unions, although certainly having a bad labor board didn't help. But it was corporate America then took advantage of the example that was given by the Reagan administration with Patco.
And the issue of the political vacuum in this country, there is no Workers' Party. There's never been a Labor Party in the United States. Uh, and the business unionism, the ideology of the AFL-CIO and Gompers for that matter, was that labor shouldn't have its own political party. It should support those parties that are helping it, oppose those parties who are hurting it. Why is the ideology of business unionism bankrupt politically for working people, and why does there have to be a change ideologically of the labor movement?
This is about knowing which side you're on. Are you representing the working class against a capitalist class where the two sides do not have interests that are in common, or not? And if you don't understand that that's the reality, you are going to fall into business unionism, into just getting your piece of the pie and hoping that it doesn't shrink too much at any given time, and fall into petty corruption and everything else that comes with that, and a total inability to take on the kind of big fights that are needed, and you don't even eventually take on the little fights. You have to start with a class struggle understanding in order to build the kind of unionism that it's going to take in the face of the kind of offensives that we're seeing. I mean, the corporate America for 2 or 3 decades was willing to tolerate giving good size raises and good benefits to a limited number of unions covering a limited portion of the working class. as a way of having enough peace, and especially given that otherwise, they had just been through an era with very militant unions that they were afraid of letting come back. And there was also the fact that there was a counterbalance in other parts of the world in terms of a large socialist bloc that was giving an example of a different way to organize the economy. Whether it was a perfect way or not, it's something everybody can argue about, but it certainly created a need for American capitalists to watch their behavior a little bit. And Lord knows they had plenty of money that they could pay these good salaries. They have plenty of money now that they could do it. They don't want to share it. And that's why you're seeing a higher and higher proportion of the money funneled to the top and the impoverishment of almost everybody else. And that's what's going to be their undoing. People
And
aren't going to stand it.
there have been initiatives. I mean, the Labor Party movement actually has a long history in the United States. And William Silvis, before the Civil War, tried to form a Labor Party, National Labor Party. There have been efforts previously, and the largest one in post-war period is the Labor Party Advocates had a convention. Your union was at it, the ILWU was at it, the California Nurses Association. There was some sentiment in organized labor, a small part of organized labor, to
Yeah.
form a Labor Party. What were the lessons of that struggle and in relationship to what we have to do today to form a
Yeah.
labor?
Well, so there were several national unions, but they were all quite small. No, we had no big national unions. We had a good number of local bodies and regional bodies that were involved. And so there were a couple million workers represented at that 1996 convention through unions that were there with delegates. So it was not a small thing, but it was still substantially short of what was going to be needed to really throw our weight around electorally. So I think a couple of the lessons from it, beyond we need some big unions with resources, is one, we at that time made an assessment that we had to build a movement first before we could run candidates. And that was in part based on the way we did union organizing at that time. Organizing and manufacturing, these were mostly manufacturing unions that were involved, not entirely, but mostly. Um, uh, at that time, it was a very long, slow process to organize a union. You did a lot of underground work before you went public. You had to have done a lot of inoculation, and it was a long haul thing, and you had to really have people ready for that fight. Um, and uh, and so we were sort of building the party in the same way, and therefore we restricted ourselves from running candidates until we had a good base built. And there was a set of circumstances that made it possible for us to get to the where we did with the 1996 convention. There was a new, more militant layer of leadership throughout the union movement, including a reform grouping at the top of the AFL-CIO that had more openness to taking on the status quo. And but a lot of folks who had grown up in the struggles of the 60s and 70s, had now had 20 years in their unions and were in union leadership positions, and that they knew better which side they were on. You had an economy that had not been great for quite a while, and including pretty bad recession at the beginning of the 90s. You had a Democrat come into office who was just tearing apart everything that working people needed. Clinton passed NAFTA. He did welfare reform. He did, rotten criminal justice bills, all kinds of bad stuff. He might as well have been a Republican. He essentially was. So it helped convince people that we needed a party of our own. The slogan was the bosses have two parties, we need one. Labor needs one. Those circumstances were all there uh, in the mid 90s. Uh, we tried to build and build and build, and instead, those circumstances started to evaporate. The economy changed, so industrial bases were being lost. The we eventually the energy that had been there in the labor movement was slipping away. broadly, not just, those in Labor Party. Then Bush got elected, 9/11 happened, that took a lot of air out of things. The fact that when Bush won, it was blamed in part on Nader, which I don't think is actually accurate. I think Nader's campaign actually forced Al Gore to get more populace than he would have otherwise and closed the gap because he was way behind before Gore got into the race. So this set of things just it made it so that the Labor Party basically missed its moment. We've got some differences now. Number one being we've got whole new ways of organizing, both in the political sphere and in the labor sphere. We are back to this model of workers organizing other workers that we had in the 1930s. That's how we organized 30,000 grad workers in 2 years. Just remarkable for a union as small as ours. We could, there's no way we could have had enough staff to do that. It was based on workers educating other workers on how to organize and then them carrying it out. That has a political equivalent, which is what they call distributed organizing, which is what the Bernie campaigns were built on. Uh, all of it also is based on, the communications revolution that we've had, that people can share this information via Zoom meetings and PowerPoint slides that they can show each other, that people can be quickly communicating via text messages or Signal or email or Slack or whatever it is that they like to use, and frequently all four versions, and social media, of course. So all of these things make it possible to move things a lot quicker. Um, and then you also can see the hunger of people because we never ran a trial balloon candidacy in the 90s. Uh, One got run last year here in the US, Osborne in Nebraska. And most of the labor movement wasn't paying attention, but some good people out in Nebraska were, and a couple folks who came in to help them, and gave as an independent running on as a labor unionist on a labor platform, came within a few points of beating a heavily financed incumbent Republican U.S. senator, and completely marginalized the Democratic Party, which frankly, in a lot of these states, the Democratic Party is completely marginalized. So, it's kind of shown that there's real possibilities here, and we need to be looking at how we can do that in other areas. And we need to be looking at understanding again also that farmers are part of the working class. And figuring out, in some of these rural areas how to put together, labor farmer coalitions again that have occurred in the past. There's obviously some complications on it in terms of the capital investments that they have to have, et cetera. The typical family farmer is operating at the whims of corporations. They are not their own master. And so I think we need to find ways to do that outreach and make common cause. And there's huge numbers of workers across these areas who have no political leadership in their area whatsoever because the Democratic Party is just completely fallen flat. And so the only thing that they're hearing is, uh, right-wing talk radio and talk TV and religious folks in those areas are frequently, leading them in exactly the wrong direction from what they need. It's certainly not liberation theology that they're hearing. So we have to find ways to communicate with folks and spread the information that they need to make sense of their lives.
Well, that these organizing for a Labor Party, say if you wanted to build a Labor Party, seems to come up though against the threat that there may not even be elections in the United States anymore. I mean, a possible Reichstag incident. I mean, the Insurrection Act, they're talking about instituting that to
Hmm.
take away democratic rights. The plan for a general strike and possible general strike in 2028. Who knows what's going to happen by 2028?
Between then and now, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
So all right, that doesn't mean we should. So we need to be doing two things. We need to be fighting for our democratic rights right now, and we need to be organizing to take advantage of our democratic fights and build a political party that answers to working people and not to corporations. And it's all part of the same fight. We have different allies in different parts of it. There's a broader alliance there to fight to maintain a shred of democracy in this country, and we need to help build that. And it frankly starts with union rights. I mean, without union rights, all of our other democratic rights are at risk. And when we lose other democratic rights, union rights are going to be obliterated. So we have to understand it's all one seamless fight.
And I mean, even in the case of federal workers, or say for that matter, public workers, the federal workers are under a very direct confrontation by Trump that he wants to bust these unions, bust the
Mhm.
federal workers' unions. There doesn't seem to be any united front of all public workers or even a united front of federal workers to say we're going to stand up together. We're not going to allow
No,
TSA to be busted. We're not going to, I mean, we're going to unite the entire workforce of federal workers
yeah.
or the entire workforce of all public workers.
Well, there are real efforts taking place, and I think more and more federal workers are realizing that they've got to throw in together in a joint fight. There's something called the Federal Unionist Network that has been convening what had been smaller scale things and has been building up bigger and bigger. And I believe that maybe later this evening, I've got a conflicting meeting myself, but I believe they're having a big national Zoom meeting of some sort of webinar with major speakers, including they now have on board, even though they were seen originally as sort of an insurgent group. They have the president of the AFL-CIO, the president of AFG, and other federal unions are going to be taking part in this. That is a good development. That is a good development. And, whether it's the tail wagging the dog or not, I'm glad to see the dog is in motion.
So you're saying that basically these attacks now, confrontational attacks, are actually forcing unions that hadn't worked together
Uh,
to start to
uh,
come together
okay.
politically.
What's one of the oldest sayings in union organizing? A bad boss is the best organizer. And we got a really, really bad boss in the White House, and he's forcing us to get organized. Um, it's our job to do twice or three or four times more than we are right now. That's what we all have to wake up every day saying, how do I build coalition? How do I get workers in motion? How do I make sure folks are educated? How do I make sure the general public knows? We've got to be at it constantly right now because we are up against folks on the other side who are doing that on a daily basis and with a lot more money than we have. We have to make up for it with people power.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much, Carl. We've been talking with Carl Rosen. He's the president of the United Electrical Workers, a union really that came out of the 30s, like the ILWU. There was an attempt to crush it. They were unsuccessful, and it's continuing to fight and organize in the working class and also supporting a labor party. So thanks for joining us today, Carl.
Sure. Thanks for having me. A great conversation.